Hi, I'm Amber Christian, the editor of Handmade Seller magazine. Do you ever wonder what goes into putting one of these together? I wanted to give you a sneak peek and an inside look at what we put together for our spring magazine. And I want to talk a little bit about why did we pick the articles that we picked as part of the magazine. So if you've ever wanted the story behind the story in producing a magazine, I think you'll enjoy this particular video. So this is about our spring magazine, and the initial story as we get into it, I'll show you this little screenshot of what it looks like. This is our featured cover artisan, Mike Ortiz. And the title of the story is Stick With It, the story of canvas monsters. You guessed it, it's a little punny. Mike actually makes stickers as part of his business. Canvas Monsters originally started in 2017. And what was so interesting about Mike's story for me to produce and have as part of the magazine is that he actually is growing a community on Patreon. He uses Twitch, he uses Discord. He's using a variety of tools that are not just the standard sell at a craft fair, commission, wholesale, that kind of model. So he's doing something very different by engaging his fan base. And so really what Mike was doing was building an engaged fandom. I mean, who doesn't want repeat buyers, right? That's like the holy grail. You want people that'll come back over and over and over again. They love your stuff. So much easier to market to an existing audience that loves and knows your stuff than it is to find a new customer. So what I loved about Mike's story is how did he actually build up that engaged fandom? He talks about how does he actually do the live streaming, how he sets it up, what kind of a schedule he produces on, and how it fits in his life as a busy dad with 2 kids and pets at home. And that all sort of feeds into the chaos of the story. I think you'll love learning more about how did he build this. If you need to be able to build revenue streams that don't require you to be in person all the time, I think this is the kind of story that you're going to love. One of the best quotes from this article is where Mike says, "It's messy and chaotic and real, but that's exactly what makes it work." A very heartwarming story. You'll learn about the Yetis in the story. Very fun stuff. Our next article is 5 Questions with SmartSet. So we are a small indie publication. We have a small print run that we do, as well as have some print on demand for the magazine. And we recently were able to move to a new community-based printer here in Minneapolis, where I have them printed. And this feature is actually about our new printer. And what's really interesting there is they've been around for 40 years. They know how the industry is evolving. They can actually teach you a lot about the best way to go about print. I will tell you, working with a community printer is so much better than having to deal with the myriad of options and crud quality that you often get from a lot of the large-scale printers. Pricing actually hasn't been that much different than the large-scale printers as well. So this is a great story about the viewpoint of the world from SmartSet and from Kevin, the current owner of SmartSet. And he actually goes into how the print world is changing, which I think you'll find interesting. Now, the next article that we have is about a new revenue stream. Just like I had talked about how things like Twitch and Patreon and other things can become revenue streams, and that works for some businesses, there are other businesses that do white labeling. White labeling can be a really great option if you also do wholesale for products. And so a lot of this is going to be kind of consumable type products for white labeling. So I featured 2 case studies. One is from Chloe Clark from Simply Sage Dog Treats, and she has a phenomenal white labeling strategy. She stands it up similar to her wholesale strategy, and she gets into exactly how she runs it and what the key differentiation is. Now, for thinking about white labeling, it's a little different than wholesale. It requires a little bit of a different mindset and a different consideration. One of the things that Chloe had to share that I thought was particularly insightful in this article is how white labeling only works when you see your clients as partners, not competitors. So if you want to learn more, you think, I never actually thought about white labeling my products. This is a fantastic case study for you to read and learn more details on. The next article, there we go, is called The Full Circle of Service, My Journey to Honor Military Veterans. This one is about a very specific niche business. Now, we all know that certain niches do better than others, and that sometimes we talk about, how do you actually really grow if you pick a specialized niche? So you might be afraid to go to smaller and smaller audiences because you think, there's not enough customers there. I'm just afraid to eliminate certain people. In this story, we learn from Nicole Pompey-Zettelmoyer. She shares the story of creating military wreaths. Military wreaths. A very specific thing that she creates out of old military uniforms. This is something that started out as an under-the-table project. So it was a pet project. The Air Force was switching over their fatigues from sea green print to modern forest green print that you see soldiers and airmen wear. And so after finding a few patterns online, she took those ideas, meshed them into one, and created a wreath. And as she would say, it's one of those where you create this really cool thing, she posts it on Facebook, shows her friends, and people go nuts. And oh, look, a business was born. For her, her journey was quite unique in seeing that she had gone viral when she first started her business. And so she actually ended up with years of a backlog to catch up. And the story isn't about helping you go viral, but it's more like what happens when you transition from being viral into a regular business? How do you successfully actually transition into that? Because those are two different types of businesses, catching up with a backlog versus actually now growing into a more sophisticated, mature business. And within her niche, because her niche is very specific to these military applications, she had to actually figure out, okay, well, what does growth look like as part of that? So she started to get into rewards programs. She started to get into how to partner with other corporations, other organizations. A very unique take on how she has used some of these different tools and strategies to grow her business. LinkedIn has been a key part of her strategy as well. Not something you typically hear as much in the handmade world, but she has great examples of how did she actually use that and how she's using it to grow her business. So if you work in a really specific niche, I think you might find this interesting as to what does growth look like and how she's intentionally growing her business. Now the next one is about two puzzle makers and is, should I expand my business? In this case, we have two companies that were having to make decisions around when is it time to expand your business. This is a tough call. This economy, for most people around the world, has its ups and downs. It can be challenging. How do you make that gamble to expand? What does that look like? That is never an easy decision for a handmade business. So this one features Tara Rogers from Chestnut and Hemlock, and also features the Oakland Puzzle Company as well. So both of them were facing different business decisions in terms of what did expansion and growth look like for their businesses. For Tara, it was making a decision around adding a new family member to the business. So she was making some intentional strides of growth because someone else in the family wanted to work for the business, so the business was going to need to grow. So she had some very certain considerations around what did that look like in terms of business structure, in terms of growth, in terms of processes. So that was unique. Oakland Puzzle Company was facing a decision about opening a retail store after telling everyone else, you shouldn't open a retail store. Why would she do this? Deanna Tibbs actually gets into why did she make the decision? Why was it the right decision at that time to open a store? And how do you actually think about when do you move into retail? Moving into retail is a very common question that comes up for a lot of handmade businesses, particularly when you've been at it for a number of years. So she talks about why did the store make sense at the time for the business? How did they evaluate the decision? And what were the initial lessons learned from that process? She also gives you some questions to ask yourself before you get ready to make a leap into something like expanding into retail. Now, our final article in the magazine is this one. It's How Creative Journaling Helps Us Cope in Difficult Times. This is from D. Michelle Perry. You may follow Michelle online. She talks about the wonder habit. Wonder is really the thing that she spends a lot of time and energy focusing on and writing about and creating for. Michelle is a very unique and interesting person. She used to work in an active conflict zone in what is now South Sudan. She lived there and worked with at-risk women and children for 7 years as a U.S. civilian embedded in a local community. So for her, she really understood the importance of creative journaling. She lived in a war zone. Just pause and think about that for a minute and what perspective that would give you. So she learned how to open up her whole world through creativity. And she also talks about how the page helps us hold what we cannot carry. How can you process emotions, process things you're feeling? Hey, we're business owners. We go through a lot, right? I mean, has the last couple of years been easy for you? Whether you're growing tremendously or you're facing the ups and downs of the economy, growth requires us to process a lot of things that we may not always have words for. And this is where creative journaling can be very helpful. She also talks about what to do if hypervigilance feels like your default setting. How do you process through that? She lived in an active war zone, had to live and process through what was that like. How do you bring yourself into a calm state when you're out of your window of tolerance? And what to do when certain stress emotions are hijacking your body. And so while we aren't necessarily living in an active war zone today, sometimes it can feel like it from our news or the media or other things we're consuming, or even just the things that are happening around us. And so how do you take those stress responses and process them in a creative way to help yourself stay in a more mentally healthy place? I think this one's a very powerful article in terms of giving you practical wisdom and practical insights. And it's part of why also in the magazine I have tried to address and make sure I've got a series of articles that is about managing the stressful side and like the mental health and the emotional health side of running a small business. We're all in environments where there's a lot of changing regulations. It's constant change. It's hard to keep up with things. And I want to provide the right supporting tools that help you process things in a healthy way. So if you're interested in the magazine, you can buy a digital copy of it on our website. You can order a print-on-demand copy of it, or you can buy a subscription to our magazine. Subscriptions to our magazines get to read our entire back catalog as part of those subscriptions as well. We also have some special trial offers as well, and I'll include links to those in the description for this show if you're not quite sure if you want to try out a subscription, so you can look at those as well. I hope you enjoyed this little sneak preview of what is in the spring magazine, and I hope you'll check out some of our other previews of our magazines. So thanks for watching this far, and if you've gotten this far and you haven't subscribed to our channel, make sure to go ahead and like and subscribe. And if you have things you'd like us to write about, add them in the comments. I'm always looking for new ideas in terms of being the editor, in terms of bringing material that is actually helpful for running your day-to-day business.